Now, one big challenge for the new Education Secretary is the growing number of children in care, with the cost falling to cash-strapped local councils. But growing even faster is the sheer number of these children in care who are being moved miles away from everything they know, their hometowns, friends, sometimes their schools, and even brothers and sisters. In England last year, 1 in 5 children in care were placed in accommodation more than 20 miles away from their old home. That's more than 17,000 children, and it's a number that's growing, up a massive 62% in the last 10 years. Now, government figures obtained by the charity Become and shared exclusively with Channel 4 News shed more light on this. They show the average child in care is living further away from home today than they were 5 years ago. The average distance in 2018 was 17.3 miles. That rose to 18.5 miles in 2023. The furthest distance a child was sent was a huge 502 miles away from their home. Although sometimes there can be good reasons why a child might be sent further away, for example, if they're in danger in their hometown. Well, the Department for Education said it was piloting ways to bring local authorities together to reduce out-of-area placements. And it said it would look at what more action is necessary to make sure every child has a safe, loving home in a location that is truly best for them. But being put into care miles away from home can have a devastating impact on young lives, as Aisha Tull reports.
I went to Earlstown, St Helens, then I went to Wales, then I went to Runcorn.
You moved 9 times in 2 years?
Yeah, but most of them were in the first year. I only had 2 placements in the second year.
But that's horrific. No one moves 9 times in 2 years.
Cherise clocked up hundreds of miles as she was moved away from her hometown, coming into the care system as a teenager after a tumultuous upbringing.
Most of what I do remember is quite negative. There was a lot of drugs and alcohol in my life growing up, a lot of neglect, physical, emotional, yeah.
When she was 8, she moved in with her sister. After their relationship became strained, she was placed into care at 15, but no new home lasted.
The longest was 3 months.
What is that like to have to move, pack your bags, and have to move somewhere that you don't know?
You're still a child at that age, even if you think you're not. You're with strangers. I was taken to somewhere I didn't know, with people I didn't know. Everything I wore, everything I did was wrote down. It was very strange. It was like I was a project in a business. It was like I entered the workplace, but I was the work.
Bouncing around the care system, Cherise became more unsettled.
You put yourself in dangerous situations, if I'm honest, you really do. You get in random people's cars, you jump trains, you walk for miles on end. You really are putting yourself in unsafe positions, but the streets at night time felt safer than being where I was.
What's it like to get into a stranger's car?
It felt more comforting than being in the staff member's car, which is really disgusting.
Why?
Because they weren't trying to control me. I had the power of what I did in those moments in time. I chose to get in that car.
Multiple placements failed. At one point, she was put in holiday cottages and caravans, moved around every 3 days.
It's dehumanising. Felt like an animal, like a piece of rubbish. Literally, you're treating my things like rubbish. Every sentimental thing that I have, and I'm not a materialistic person, but sentimental things are a big thing, especially when you're in care. They're little things that remind you of your family. You wouldn't even pack them yourself. They'd pack them for you. Half the time you'd lose all your stuff. You'd literally get unpacking out of a bin bag.
At 15, Cherise was on course to get her GCSEs, but keeping up with school became impossible.
With everything going on, there's no way that I could even focus on education. I had too much going on, I couldn't even focus on myself. It was just so chaotic, that lifestyle, so chaotic. you don't have a minute to think, never mind to think about. It was fight or flight all the time. Fight or flight, 24/7 in the care system.
Can you see them? Three.
But in 2020, Sharice's life turned around. Her 3-year-old daughter gave her the family she'd been longing for.
Having her inside of me or her there just made me realise this isn't about me anymore, this is about her. And because I had to care for her, I had to care about myself. So I changed everything. I changed everything I did. She became my main focus. She still is. I'm going to give her the life that I never had.
Now settled and happy, bringing up her 3-year-old, she couldn't imagine her daughter going through what she went through. By speaking out, she hopes her experiences will make authorities think twice about placing children in care away from what they know.
Aisha Toll there. Now, in response to the concerns about availability of placements for children in the care system, the Local Government Association, which represents councils, told us as a record number of children have needed to come into the care of local councils in recent years, this has put a real strain on the availability of local high-quality provision in some areas. We have long raised concerns over the availability of homes for children in care, and we want to work with the government to address these. And joining me now are Catherine Sachs-Jones, who's Chief Executive of Become, a national charity for children in care, and Dr. Mark Kerr, Head of the Children's Homes Association. Now, we heard from Sharice there. I know that what she says, Mark, is you need to treat children in care like you would treat your own children. And we wouldn't treat our own children like this, would we? We wouldn't take them away from everything they know and house them miles away.
No, and the first thing to say is that we would like all children to be, where appropriate, close to friends, family, their connections, and where they have a sense of belonging. But some children, for whatever reasons, can't be kept in their own area or have such needs that require really specialist care that might not be available. So, for example, if we look at it in a health kind of lens, for example, you're not always going to have specialist healthcare right on your doorstep. And we have had an unprecedented number of children coming into care with changing and differing needs. And we work very closely with the LGA, who are correct, but it takes time to generate children's homes placements.
Do those specialist cases then, Catherine, account for the figures that we revealed today, that 62% increase in 10 years in children have been housed miles away from where they're from?
No, they don't. I mean, absolutely, there will be some children who need to be moved to a different part of the country, for safety or to get support. We accept that. But what we're hearing from children all the time is that they're being moved because there's nothing suitable for them closer to home. And that's what we just heard from Sharice. These are children who are being moved to a different part of the country, often with no notice, to an area they don't know at all, sometimes not just once, but many times a year, because there's nothing for them in their local area. And that has a massive impact on them. It moves them away from their school, away from friends, sometimes, sadly, away from brothers and sisters, has a huge toll on their mental health, and leaves them lonely, isolated and vulnerable to exploitation. We think that has to change. It's not good enough that we don't have the right places for children in the areas that are local to them.
Do you agree, Mark, that it has to change?
We have to make improvements to be able to meet some of the needs of children that have changed. I don't think we have the data right now in terms of which children are placed out of area that should be or could be placed in their home area. We just don't have that data to be able to kind of disaggregate those numbers. But it's interesting, if you look at the data, it doesn't always fit the rhetoric that's being kind of said. For example, North West is always cited as an example where there is a disproportionate number of care homes.
Well, the North West, a quarter of all care homes are in the North West, so that tells you a lot, doesn't it? I mean, a quarter of all the children in care aren't in the North West.
Well, if you actually look at the government data sets in terms of number of children as a net gain for a local authority, excuse the language, but actually the North West only has 161 extra children, whereas if you look at Outer London, has 1,500 children placed in their area that is not from that area. So it's quite complex once you get into the data.
Catherine, isn't this what happens when 4 out of 5 children's homes are privately owned, a lot of them owned by private equity companies, run, you might say, for the benefit of their investors?
I think there are questions to ask when we're seeing big private companies making significant profits, some on average £45,000 a year per child, but yet we can't have the places that we need for these often vulnerable children in the areas that matter. And instead, we are seeing more children's homes in areas of the country where properties are cheaper, where wages are lower, and not where children need them. And a lot of this is being driven not by the needs of children, but by decisions taken by big companies, owned by large investment firms, many of them big private equity investors. So I think there are significant questions to ask when we have a children's social care system that is not working for children, and yet some people making significant profits on the back of it.
These are your members, Mark. Is there profiteering going on?
There are some quarters where we think there are improvements need to be made. We made a decision in April this year that to be a member of the Children's Home Association, you must be domiciled in the UK. Most of the private equity ones are in tax havens. They're no longer part of our membership. But it must be remembered that the independent sector filled the void when local authorities and charities withdrew from the sector in the early 1990s following kind of abuse scandals and other historic kind of events. They didn't want to hold that risk. But we also need to look at the barriers. There are three key barriers for us in terms of getting homes in the right places. Workforce, which is one of the reasons that often in certain areas there is a high number of children's homes because there are people who are available to work. Access to capital, that it's very difficult for providers to access capital other than the private equity ones. And one of the third kind of key areas is planning permission. You need a planning permission for a home, and if the government works with us to address some of those kind of key barriers, we may be able to get more homes in the right areas.
But just a quick question to both of you to end. Are some of the fees now being charged by these private providers just ridiculous, beyond belief? What do you say, Mark?
Depending on what the case is, the average fee at the moment is probably about £5,700, £5,800 a week, and that is not profiteering. Local authorities are on average...
Some cases, though, maybe.
No, not really. Local authorities...
Catherine, just a final word to you. We've got to end it soon.
15%
I mean,
more.
undoubtedly, there are some people making a lot of money out of the system, and that's not right, and there are serious questions to ask at the level of profiteering going on.
OK, thank you both. We could talk for much longer, but really appreciate your time.